Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. My name is Ari, and today we're going to have some more stories about our toxic life. But before we start, it would be so much appreciated if you would subscribe to my channel, like the video, if you enjoy it, and maybe leave a comment down below. These simple clicks would mean a lot to the future of this channel and really reward the effort that I put in every day. And now without further ado, let's go. Today's first story. In this story, Opie discovers his wife's affair through a WhatsApp group chat with her ex-husband and his girlfriend. Shocked, he gathers evidence, confronts her at a family gathering, and exposes her infidelity. They divorce, causing strain between their families. He moves on, finding happiness in a new relationship. His ex-wife's ex-husband also betrays her, leaving her alone. Now let's get into the story. I was married to my wife for just a year when I found out about her affair. Before Sarah and I married, we were family friends, and our families knew one another. In fact, her mom was a very close friend of my mom, and somehow their relationship continued with us, their children. As a teenager, I had been crushing on Sarah for a while, but after she married her previous husband, what I had for her died down, and I moved on with my life. Unfortunately, 2 years after she was married, she divorced her husband because of his infidelity, and that's when we became close friends. Throughout the time she was dealing with her divorce, I was there to stand by and support her, and in the process, we fell in love with each other, and I asked her to be my girlfriend. According to her, she said, I was nothing like her ex-husband, and she wished she had met me before she got married to him. Sincerely, I loved Sarah so much, and shortly after she was done with her divorce, I asked her to move in with me, being that I had known her for years and wanted us to live together. At the time, Sarah and I started dating. I was not in any relationship, and I wanted to settle down too. I was tired of being alone, and as soon as I asked her to move in with me, she did. We didn't date for so long. We dated for 9 months, and after 9 months, she was gone. Months of waking up next to her, every day. I believed it was time to make things official. We had a small wedding, invited friends and family, and everything was great. Marrying Sarah was like a dream come true, and I treated her with so much love. On her end, Sarah cared for me, cleaned the house, and did all the necessary chores. She was so sweet, and I loved coming home from work to be with her. Even after we married, we continued with our bi-monthly family gathering, where our parents and available siblings would come together at my parents' or her parents' house, and we would all eat together like a family. Life was great for us, and we barely had any issues, except when I forgot to take out the trash. After Sarah divorced her ex-husband, she told me she was no longer in contact with him, especially since they ended things on bad terms, and I believed her. I hadn't seen how much she had been hurt by him, and I knew it was difficult for her to leave someone she had dated for 4 years, and were married for 3 years. And that's why I tried as much as possible to comfort her and encourage her during that time. We didn't have a child or thought about having one because Sarah didn't want children, and she preferred we either got a dog or a bird whenever she was ready to become a parent, and I was cool with that. I didn't like kids anyway, and I was cool with us owning a pet sometime in the future. Even our parents tried to convince us by telling us all the beautiful things about having kids and why children were important, but we still did not let them get to us. Now that I write this, I'm grateful I didn't let my parents convince me because I'd probably be raising another man's child. So it all happened that one day Sarah and I were in the living room, watching a movie together on a Friday night like we always did, and then I realized I could not find my phone. Not like it was missing. I had this bad habit of dropping my phone in a place I would forget. At first, I searched the couch and the whole living room, but I could not find it. And she didn't bother helping me find it because it wasn't the first or second time it was happening that week. The worst part was that I loved to leave my phone on silent, so even if I called the number, I'd need to go from room to kitchen to bathroom to hear the vibration. After searching for a couple of minutes, and I was already frustrated, I asked for Sarah as it was a big distraction from the movie we were watching, and since it was a series we were anticipating, she was so engrossed that she didn't even notice when I left. I checked the kitchen, the laundry room. I did laundry just before we watched the movie, the bedroom, and eventually, I found my phone in the bathroom. I left it there after I used the toilet. I was a bit relieved because I had a work meeting in less than 10 minutes, and just as I was about to leave our bedroom, a WhatsApp group chat notification popped on her screen. There was something weird with the group chat name and all the sensual emojis attached to it. Out of curiosity, I opened the group chat to read the message, and at first glance, I knew what was going on, but I was wondering what my wife was doing in a group like that. It wasn't until I read the messages that I realized that my wife had secretly been having an affair behind my back, and the most heartbreaking part was that she was cheating on me with her ex-husband and his girlfriend. They said all sorts of nasty things to one another in the group, and from all I gathered, they had been having threesomes. They even had one that week, and they were already making plans for the next, and all the toys they wanted to use to spice things up. Honestly, I stood in shock for almost a minute and tried to wrap my head around what I had just seen. It was shocking to think that we both talked about her ex-husband that same day, and she cussed at him and wished him all the miserable things in the world. I knew I would have to read their messages over and over to be sure I wasn't making things up in my head. So I took screenshots of the messages I saw, took screenshots of her ex-husband and his lover's picture in case she tried to deny it, and I sent them to my number in WhatsApp. Then I marked her message as unread, and I cleared every trace. I could not even confront her because it was a lot to take in that night, and I couldn't sleep the whole night. My head nearly popped open. The following morning, she noticed I was a bit dull and cold toward her, but she believed I would cheer up once we met our family. We were gathering at her parents' house on the second Saturday of the month. When we got to her parents' house, I tried not to ruin the happy moment and waited until it was time for lunch. While we were eating, I asked her if she had seen her ex-husband recently, and the question surprised everyone. She answered with a smile and denied not seeing him since their divorce. My hands were already shaking at that point, and her parents noticed it. I couldn't control my anger anymore and yelled at her to explain the screenshots I saw on her phone. When she got my phone and read the messages, her mouth dropped and she began to cry immediately. At the same time, I sent all the screenshots to our joint family group chat, and everyone was shocked. I wasn't the only one that was so disappointed. Her parents were so ashamed and disappointed that they yelled at her to explain what I was talking about, and she did nothing but cry. After I exposed her in front of her parents and my parents, I walked out of the house and she tried to follow me. I left her there, and she did not return home that evening. The following day, I packed all of her stuff and drove it to her parents' house, and I left. She arrived at my house the following week and begged me to forgive her. She even created a small scene as I entered my car and drove out, and I didn't care. Eventually, we divorced, and she has been miserable since then. Also, her infidelity affected the relationship between our families somehow, and my mom is no longer close to her mother like they used to be. It's been 4 years, and I'm glad I didn't let her infidelity hold me back. I'm currently in a relationship with the woman I intend to marry, but we are taking things slow. As for Sarah, she found out her ex-husband was only using her for pleasure, and he didn't even marry his girlfriend. He dumped them both, and since then, she has not been in any relationship. Today's second story. In this story, Opie married his childhood friend, agreeing to have children when ready. After 5 years, his wife avoided having kids, revealing she disliked babies and cheated on him, using his money to support her affair. He discovered her deception, reported her to the police for identity theft, and divorced her. Now remarried, he cherishes his new life with a daughter. Now let's get into the story. I, 38 male, was married to my wife, 36 female, for 6 years. My wife and I were old friends before we started dating. She was a close friend of my immediate younger sister, so I knew her right from when she was a teenager. It wasn't until I graduated from college that something happened, and it brought the two of us closer, and from there we fell in love. Since we already knew each other so well, our friendship bloomed, and we ended up dating and marrying after 1 year. Before my wife and I married, we agreed to only have kids once we were ready. She was the one who proposed it, and initially, I thought it would be only for the first 2 to 4 years of our marriage. I love children, and I thought she said that because she wanted us to spend more time together or get better paying jobs. That would put things in place before the kids arrived, first 4 to 5 years after we married. I told my wife that I was ready for us to have children, but she kept coming up with multiple excuses that became annoying. Either she would say something about going for medical checkups to be sure her ovaries are in good shape, or we could just get a dog instead of having a child. Her excuses kept coming for almost a year, and because we were always fighting and arguing, we started to get distant from each other. It's not like I intentionally got distant. She was the one that started it. She refused to make my meals, do my laundry, or even sleep on our bed with me. And seeing all of this made me madder. I would not have been so worried about having children if it were left for me alone. I was only concerned that her biological clock was ticking and she wasn't saying anything about having kids. Even before we married, I had always imagined having at least one child with her and how we'd be a big happy family, but my wife was trying to frustrate that reality. When our arguments and fights continued to the extent that I couldn't take it anymore, we were forced to sit and talk with a marriage counselor. Our marriage was slowly falling apart, and it was the exact opposite of what I had in mind for us. All those years of being married, I thought my wife and I were on the same page, but during one of our marriage counseling I found out we weren't. In my presence, my wife told the counselor that she hated babies and couldn't even imagine having one. Also, she said she was very concerned about her body and wasn't ready to ruin her shape for a child or pause her life to care for a child. When I heard that, I felt so betrayed because she never mentioned it while we were dating, and she didn't say a thing about that even on the days we kept arguing about it. I didn't know what to do or say, so I left the session to clear my head. It was painful to discover that my wife played on my intelligence, despite knowing how much I loved children. I was so mad at her when we got home that we did not speak for almost 2 weeks, and she wasn't even bothered. Around that time, she would come home late at night and go to bed. The following day, she would leave so early for work. I tried as much as possible to not let everything weigh me down, but I couldn't. It really affected me. I imagined my whole life without a child because my wife cared so much about her body. The most painful part was, even when we had this agreement before we married, she never mentioned anything about not liking babies or not wanting to pause her life to raise kids. If she had told me, I wouldn't have married her because we had different opposing values. There's no way I would have accepted to marry a woman who hated babies and didn't want one when I loved babies and wanted at least 2 children. Throughout the time my wife and I were not talking to each other, she never showed concern for me, even for one day. Instead, she would come home looking cheerful and happy, then go to bed. I had to make my meals and care for the house some days. There were also nights my wife did not sleep at home. On those nights, she would text me late at night and say she was sleeping over at one of her girlfriend's places. I don't know which one hurt more, finding out that my wife would never be a mother or her sleeping out and spending time with her friends while neglecting me. Months after my last counseling session, our marriage got worse. Our arguments started again, but it got worse this time. My wife became something else, and anytime we fought, she would say I could go ahead and divorce her if I didn't want us to be married anymore. Every time she said this, it broke my heart because I thought it would be better to fix things instead of divorcing. I didn't understand why she kept saying that until I made a shocking discovery. One day, I received a call from my bank about strange charges on my account. When I checked it out, I saw that the charges were going into an apartment complex I had no idea about. I told the bank I had no idea about the apartment and tried to get them to charge back. After talking to the bank people, I decided to go and check out the apartment myself since it was in the same town I lived in. It didn't make sense for someone to charge my account. Because I was careful not to leave any of my bank or card details online, after driving for a while, I successfully located the apartment and decided to go to the apartment to see who was using my information to pay rent. When I knocked on the door, a young man in his early or mid-20s came out. When he opened the door, my eyes caught a glimpse of my wife's picture hanging directly on the other side of the wall. I was so confused, and the guy started talking before I could ask the questions in my head. He said he knew I was my wife's husband because she was his sugar mummy. Immediately I heard that, I had goosebumps on my skin and my lower stomach churned. He said my wife rented the apartment for him and I had to keep my mouth shut or he would steal her completely from me. Talk about audacity. I couldn't even confront him like I had in mind, but I had a better idea. I was so mad at his audacity, so I began searching for his landlord and found him the next day. I reported everything to his landlord, and several days later, he was thrown out of the house. As for my wife, after I found out about her AAP, I didn't even say anything because there was nothing to talk about. I began to reconnect the dots and realized my wife had been cheating on me for a very long time, but I was too blinded to see that. My wife caused me the most pain, so I couldn't let her go scot-free. I filed a report to the police, and my wife was arrested for identity theft and eventually charged. We also divorced because I realized we were like water and oil, and she no longer had a place in my life. I now understand why she kept saying I could divorce her if I wanted. It was because she had someone else in her life and was using my money to pay his rent. This happened to me a very long time ago, and as I share this, I have a beautiful 3-year-old daughter, and I'm married to a beautiful younger woman. After things ended with my wife, I was down for a year plus, but I realized that I was living in the past instead of the present, so I decided to build the kind of life I wanted. I have never been so relieved and happier.